Let me give you just a little bit of context real quickly before the main speaker comes up. Here's the deal. I grew up going to a Catholic church every single Sunday. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and we went to church every single Sunday. And one of 6 kids, as soon as I got off to Ohio State University, you know, the things that I lived for were Ohio State, Michigan football, you know, going to spring break. I didn't go to church anymore. Bottom line is I came down to Dallas, Texas. I met a girl who had no religious upbringing at all, and we got invited to that big old mega church across the road called Fellowship Church. And I was about 98, and I got my first Bible study ever. And along that same time period, my mother had sent me a tape. She's the one that everybody thought was just so religious. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you met her, she'd be putting holy water and getting you scapulars and things like that. And she sent me a tape called Signs from God, Science Test Faith. It was on a big VHS tape, you know. And I thought it was amazing, but I didn't know what it meant. In fact, I was not going to Catholic church, but I was really studying the difference between a Protestant and Catholic. Long story short is, I lost that tape. My mother passed away very tragically in 2004. And about 2008, so 8-9 years later, some guy calls me and says, "Hey, Tim, I was cleaning out my house and I found you left a tape at my house." And he said, "I thought maybe you'd want it." And I got there and it was my mom's VHS tape. See, the problem is I never found out what it meant. And I told Ron earlier, I called Fox News. I was like, what? I had 2 questions, you know. Is it real? And what does it mean? And it took me like 9-10 years to find that out. And we won't be going into that full story tonight, but I got a hold of Mr. Ron Tesoriero. Am I saying that right, Ron? I never said it right like 5, 6, 7 years ago. But I got a hold of Ron Tesoriero from Australia through the internet, like a spaz that I am, sent him like 5 pages of how I'm called to do this, I'm sure. And Ron sent me a book called Reason to Believe. And by the way, I know Ron, you give any money he gets, they give to the Mary McCallop Foundation. I mean, he's not in this for money. I don't make a red cent off any of the stuff back there. But if you don't got that book, if you didn't get that book, make sure you leave with the book, whether you're agnostic, atheist, Catholic, whatever. Just leave with the book. It's amazing. But what happened is when I heard the story, it changed my life, to say the least. And I had one thing to say, and that's probably why you're all here tonight. The ones that have already seen this. I said, why doesn't everybody know about this? And I called Ron and I said, Ron, we need to get you on Larry King. We need to get you on Oprah. And he said, because I'm kind of a passionate spaz and he's real laid back and methodical. And he said, not now, Tim. We're doing more research. I'm like, more research? Unbelievable. And for those of you who have never seen this, what you're going to miss is there's a lady that Ron personally filmed. There's this guy, he's a household name in Australia. Think of Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes, Anderson Cooper, Pierce Morgan. That's who he is in Australia. And when Ron researched all of this stuff and came to believe it's true, I remember he goes, it would be like wanting a portrait of your wife and your next door neighbor was Leonardo da Vinci. And he goes, that was my neighbor, Mike Willesee, famous. And he said, I wanted the whole world to know this. I wanted the whole world to know this. And so when back in 2008 or so, I had a chance for them to come into the United States, and we filmed them. There's a DVD back there, but I want you to know that there's so much more. He personally filmed the lady, this famous personality. They filmed a lady having a stigmata. You won't see that tonight. A statue crying and bleeding. For 5 years I've been talking about this and showing the films, and people say, but did you see it yourself? Like, well, no. And I said, but here we have a guy who did it. The film footage you see, he was the primary person. In fact, nothing like that has ever been filmed in history, ever, with the prophetic statement of Miss Catalina Rivas. But there was something very profound, I won't steal his thunder, that he'd been working on as it relates as a Catholic to the source and summit of our faith. And I'm sure he'll go into the details of how that came about, yes? A little bit. He was called on, he was the main person involved, he's a very humble man, when the then Cardinal and the now Pope Francis called Dr. Ricardo Castanon And Mr. Tesoriero was there filming the primary investigation. And it is literally life-changing. I want to warn you. He's very smart. He's very analytical. He's very in-depth. So if you're scientific, you're going to love him. If you're like me, you're going to have to hear it like 5 times. It's a lot to chew on. There's a book, there's a DVD. We got plenty of time. We're going to hang out. And we actually have a follow-up starting Monday. And it's just absolutely life-changing. He's been to, I don't know, 3 places in the United States. And this is his last stop before he moves on. And it happened to be at St. Francis of Assisi, the very name the then Cardinal, the now Pope, took on. So we feel it's very providential. So if you give a warm welcome all the way from Australia from Mr. Ron Tesoriero.
How did you handle the chain of custody issues from once you took the samples and sent it to the lab and you have the documentation for that?
Absolutely. As you're aware, I'm very conscious of the need to ensure the chain of custody was maintained and documented. As you saw, we physically took a piece of the sample on that day in October 1999, and we positioned it in a special package which was sealed, and we carried that package, Dr. Castro and I, to North America. And it was then that we started the process. We brought it to the forensic labs and the DNA labs, and each of them document the receiving of the sample, the affixing on the container that contains the material, a code which identifies the file number. That file number is carried through in all of the tests. So I have no doubt that we can satisfy the most aggressive skeptic that the chain of command, the chain of custody, from the time of the taking of the sample to its examination in those laboratories that you saw, was well covered.
I wanted to know about the blood samples, also with the Shroud of Turin that you had mentioned. Did they do blood samples on that? And also, I noticed that they took a blood sample from Catalina, but we didn't hear anything about the report, what came out of that.
Yeah.
And is there anything that can connect them all together besides the fact that they don't have DNA?
Yes. I'll deal with that last question first because it's a good question. It appears that on the testing that we've done on these samples associated with the blood of Christ, namely the statue of Christ in Cuchibamba and the Eucharistic miracle, that no genetic profile from the nucleus is obtainable. So we suspect that that will be the same in the other cases. They found that same result when they dealt with the sudarium, which is the face cloth that was put around the face of Jesus at the time when he was taken down from the cross. It's the second cloth referred to in John's Gospel when they go in and see on the day after the day of the resurrection. There's a reference in the Gospel to 2 cloths. One is believed to be the Shroud of Turin. The other one is this face cloth that we're talking about. If you read the book, there's a fairly good coverage of the story of the sudarium and the testing that's being done. But they could not get a genetic profile from the nucleus of that case, and they have got a mitochondrial DNA result, which is the mother's line. The situation is that there appears to be a code they can get from outside the nucleus of the cell that relates only to the mother. And that code is directly from your mother to your grandmother going on. And so it's a means of identification or of cross-referencing and verifying these various samples. And we think that that is going to be the way to go in view of the fact that logically it would be impossible to think or conceive that there might be a code in the nucleus if it involved a male-female union in the case of Jesus. But I mentioned in the book this idea that I have that we can find a reference point to the maternal line of Jesus by going to, Mary's not around so we can't get her bone or DNA, but St. Anne's body was found back in the olden days, back in I think it's 9th or 10th century. You'll see a good reference to this history on the internet. But what I found interesting was that there was a 1894 article in New York Times that talked about how the story of the bones of St. Anne being found, how part of it was brought from the Vatican to New York, to the Church of St. Anne in New York. It's a section of bone, and another section of the bone of the body was brought to a cathedral or a church in Canada. So there is a source from obtaining, a potential source for obtaining a code from the mother's line by drilling a drill hole in the bone and taking out enough material to be able to get the code from that. And apparently this code is far more durable, more likely to give a result. And that hasn't been done in these other cases, and that will be the source of the direction of new investigation subject to the Pope's agreement.
Hi. You suggested that, this all turns evolution on its head, so I'm wondering what you propose in place of evolution as far to explain the existence of man and the diversity of life, etc.
So do you believe in evolution?
Yeah.
You do?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What do you think about the argument?
I think it suggests that there could be a supernatural instance that set off the chain of evolution that was used by God to create man. So I believe in evolution through creative design.
But do you believe in evolution? Do you believe in my argument that evolution says that all life is a product of an evolutionary process from one source?
Yes, sir.
You do that, and and all life comes from there.
Yes.
So what happens if you find an exception?
I think that there could be supernatural
All right.
instances outside of the general evolutionary process.
All right.
I don't know if the one instance entirely disproves the entire theory.
Well, we start with one item at a time. We have a reality in this story. There is tissue, cells, evidence of life that doesn't come from that tree. Okay? So, and that's a fact. These are built on assumptions. We don't know how life formed at the beginning. So you've got a gap there in your theory. No one knows how life started, and it's an assumption. But I have a reality here. Now science prides itself in the ability to absorb new evidence. What is evidence? Evidence is what you can see, measure and touch and determine its existence of. So that's evidence of life that has come in this form, if that story is true. So we're juxtaposing an assumption at this point with a reality here. Now science has to consider it. It has to reject what I say, that didn't happen for some reason, or that my conclusions are wrong. But now you say evolution is proven. If you were to remove the paradigm that evolution is the answer and then start from the position, let's look at everything that we see on Earth, all of life. We see similarities, and it's similarities that is their basis for saying that evolution has occurred. If you were to go and get a drawing of the suspension system of the T-model Ford, you'd see a beautiful spring system and steering system, but very simple. Juxtapose that to a drawing of the suspension and steering system of the Rolls-Royce. Now, you wouldn't draw a conclusion from the fact that both of them do the same job, but one's simpler than the other, that one evolved from the other. And that's the problem I see with evolution, is that they assume that evolution is the explanation and then try and make it fit the argument. But I say you can't have a theory that says that all life came from here if you find one exception. Otherwise you've got to remove the word all from your statement of science. And when you do that, what happens? Think about it, don't rush into it.
But aside from my beliefs, I was just curious what you propose instead of evolution. If evolution
I don't have to. All I have to say is you can't go talking about a theory that doesn't make sense in light of that fact. You have to go back and I don't have to do it.